Coming up on Arirang News, President Moon Jae-in gives credit to major South Korean conglomerates for the fruitful outcomes of his summit last month with U.S. President Joe Biden. These companies, including Samsung and Hyundai, together pledged tens of billions of dollars in investment in America. South Korea's consumer prices rose last month by 2.6%, the most in 9 years. The rise led by grocery prices due to a poor harvest, but also oil prices up due to the extreme lows last year in the early days of the pandemic. And schools in the greater Seoul area are going to be letting more kids back into the classroom. Middle schools now, like high schools and elementary schools, will be operating at 2/3 capacity. The goal is full opening by August. It's 5:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. The breakthrough of cryptocurrencies, so far used mostly for investing and speculation, has also put the spotlight on the idea of digital currencies issued by central banks, CBDCs for short. No country has yet changed its currency to a digital token, but many are now experimenting with the idea, including the Bank of Korea. The BOK will start testing the feasibility of a digital won in a virtual environment later this year. To start our program today, I'm joined in the studio by our very own Kim Jae-hee, who has been doing a deep dive into these issues and exploring it for us. Jae-hee, good to have you with us today.
Good afternoon, Devin.
Well, before we get into exactly what the Bank of Korea is doing, help us understand what a central bank digital currency is and how that differs from what we know as cryptocurrencies.
Well, Devin, a CBDC is a national currency represented by a digital token, whereas cryptocurrencies are a virtual asset and are currently not recognized by the government as a currency. Also, cryptocurrencies are decentralized while CBDCs would be centralized. State-issued digital tokens would also be backed by the full faith and credit of a state, so they should be more stable and secure than crypto. But as same as cryptocurrencies, CBDCs, to a varying degree, will be based on blockchain technology, which guarantees security. The transition to a digital currency would come with various benefits, such as reduced costs for transactions and maintenance. The BOK has acknowledged the need for a transition to a digital token.
There's great need for central banks to issue CBDCs as a safe means of payment that is free of credit risks and liquidity risks.
But there are also potential downside risks. Transactions made with CBDCs are trackable, giving the government great powers of surveillance. This could pose risk to people's privacy, Devin.
Okay, Jae-hee, so you said that the Bank of Korea is planning to launch a pilot program for CBDC. What do they hope to achieve with that, and how are they going to do it?
Well, the Bank of Korea is planning to launch a 10-month simulation study of CBDCs starting August this year to test ways of issuing, redeeming, and making payments with the digital won. The pilot platform requires partnerships with private companies. The central bank will issue the currency, and private financial services institutions and fintech and IT companies will be in charge of the currency circulation. All this will be done in a virtual environment. The BOK points out that the pilot program might not lead to the issuance of a CBDC right away, but it is the first step in building the foundation for it.
This is the first step in constructing an experimental environment for technological research into CBDCs. In Phase 1 this year, we'll conduct tests related to payments and deposits. Next year, in Phase 2, we'll test remittances between countries, offline payments, and digital asset purchases, such as the purchase of digital artwork and copyrights.
The BOK will also choose a private firm as a technology supplier through an open bidding. Some companies have already shown interest, such as Naver, Kakao, and the IT arm of LG Corporation, LG CNS.
No one has experience yet in issuing CBDCs, so businesses are eager to be first ones to get it, even at their own expense. So this opportunity to do so with the government's budget is of great interest to them.
The budget for the trial is almost 5 billion Korean won, which is about $4.5 million US dollars.
Well, I understand it's not just the Bank of Korea that's looking at projects like this. The Fed has expressed interest for one. So what are other countries doing in terms of development of CBDCs?
Well, most major central banks around the world are exploring or experimenting with CBDCs. Now, China has the ambitious goal of reshaping the dollar-centered global economy into a digital yuan. It's been testing out its digital yuan in regions like Shenzhen, Suzhou, Beijing, and even Hong Kong. In the U.S., the Boston Federal Reserve and MIT are collaborating on a research project to construct and test a digital dollar. Their initial research will be released in the third quarter this year. UK in April forged a task force to look into a potential digital pound, the Bitcoin. Japan has already kicked off phase 1 of its proof of concept testing for a digital yen, and Russia is planning to launch a prototype for a digital ruble this year. Meanwhile, the Bahamas officially issued its digital sand dollar in October 2020.
There's a war going on to develop digital currencies, with economies hoping to make their CBDC a world reserve currency. I believe South Korea is a little behind, not in terms of IT, but in government policy and strategy. The Bank of Korea should fast forward its research on the digital won.
And lastly, Jae-hee, we might wonder if we're not going to the banks for services like processing our credit cards and debit card transactions, things like that. What's going to become of the banks? How are they dealing with this? How are they planning to respond?
Well, Devin, many economists are worried that the transition to digital token would threaten the traditional banking system. Now, people would be able to transfer their deposits from their bank accounts to a CBDC account, which is thought to be more reliable and safe. In this case, banks may no longer be able to make money by taking deposits and making loans. But the BOK stressed that it'll work to ensure that banks can coexist.
A recent report published by the Bank for International Settlements says that the first consideration in issuing a CBDC should be whether it can be harmonized with the current financial system. Our pilot program also aims harmony with the current financial system.
Now, it's been suggested that one way to do that might be a cap on CBDC holdings. So it's hard to say at this point what the banking industry will look like after CBDC issuance.
Indeed, and Jae-hee, we thank you for all of your hard work on that report, and as this technology develops, we hope to be able to come back to you for all the updates.
My pleasure, Devin.
President Moon Jae-in held a lunch meeting today with representatives of South Korea's 4 leading conglomerates, Samsung, SK, LG, and Hyundai, to discuss the results of his recent summit with U.S. President Joe Biden. Moon credited these leaders and their companies with the good outcomes of the summit, referring to the tens of billions of dollars in investment that they pledged to make in the U.S. Those investments helped develop partnerships in new and important industries. Kimchi reports.
President Moon Jae-in praised South Korea's major conglomerates for the fruitful outcome of his recent trip to the U.S. Moon had a luncheon meeting on Wednesday with SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won, Hyundai Motor Group Chairman Chung Hee-sun, and LG Group Chairman Koo Kwang-mo. Samsung Electronics Vice Chairman Kim Ki-nam attended on behalf of de facto chair Lee Jae-yong, who is behind bars.
반도체, 배터리, 전기차 이런 이제 최첨단 기술, 최첨단 제품에서 서로 간의 부족함, 공급망을 서로 보완하는 관계로까지 이렇게 이제 더 포괄적으로 발전된 게 굉장히 뜻깊은 일이라고 생각이 되고요.
The four groups announced investments worth over $39 billion in the U.S., a move intended to help build supply chain resilience. SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won said he'll make continued efforts toward an active economic partnership between Seoul and Washington, while LG Group Chairman Koo Kwang-mo pledged to create more opportunities. Moon asked the companies for continued support while brushing off concerns that the major investment in the U.S. could lead to a loss of new jobs in the local economy.
우리 대기업들이 앞장서서 나가게 되면 그 중소 중견 협력업체들도 동반해서 진출하게 되고 또 거기에 우리 이렇게 부품 소재, 장비 이런 게 또 크게 수출이 되기 때문에 그 오히려 우리 국내 일자리가 더 창출이 되고 더 많은 그 기회들이 생기는 것이거든요.
As for the politically sensitive issue of considering a special presidential pardon for Samsung chief Lee Jae-yong, Moon said that he understands the difficulties. The top office said the leaders asked the president to consider a recent proposal made by 5 major business lobby groups, that is, to pardon Lee. Moon was also quoted as saying that the current economic situation is different from before and that he is aware that companies are being requested to make bold actions. Kimchi, Arirang News.
South Korea's consumer prices in May rose by the most in 9 years. There was supply pressure on grocery prices for one, but also oil prices were a factor because of how low prices were a year earlier. Bae-eun-ji reports.
South Korea's consumer prices in May recorded their biggest jump since April 2012. According to data released by Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the country's consumer price index stood at 107.46 last month, up 2.6% compared to the same period the previous year.
The increase was mainly driven by a steep rise in oil prices, which went up by more than 23%, the biggest jump in almost 13 years.
This led to a 3.1% on-year increase in the price of petroleum products. Statistics Korea says the jump was likely due to last year's low base figures.
Global demand for oil plummeted because of the COVID-19 pandemic last year, so the jump in oil prices this month was because of the base effect from this.
Due to a poor harvest and bird flu, agricultural livestock and fisheries product prices also rose by 12%, showing double-digit on-year price hikes for 5 straight months. Of them, the price of green onions soared the most by 130%, followed by garlic, which went up by 53%. The price of rice was up by 14%, while the price of eggs rose by 45%.
Grocery prices did go up, maybe because it rained a lot last year. I feel like the prices of everything from rice to fruit and vegetables all went up.
Statistics Korea says the inflation will last for a while, but will likely slow down in the second half of this year when the base effect no longer affects the figure. Bae-eun-ji, Arirang News.
OPEC and its allies, known as OPEC Plus, have confirmed that they will be hiking crude oil output through July. In an online meeting Tuesday, they agreed to add another 2.1 million barrels of crude a day to their output from May to July. As part of these plans, Saudi Arabia is gradually adding 1 million barrels after some voluntary cuts it made previously. The economic recovery in the U.S., Europe, and Asia is expected to boost demand in the second half of the year as people start traveling again. Now, the latest on the coronavirus situation. The number of new cases in South Korea today shot back up to almost 700 after a number of days below 500. Officials say that was largely due to more testing. Min Soo-kyun reports.
Today marks 500 days since South Korea reported its first coronavirus case. Since then, it has seen more than 141,000 cases. On Wednesday, the country reported 677 new COVID-19 cases, up more than 200 from the previous day. Of them, 654 were locally transmitted and 23 were from overseas. 2 more fatalities were also reported, raising the death toll to 1,965. Infections remain heavily concentrated in the Greater Seoul area, which accounts for more than 70% of Wednesday's total cases. The uptick in cases on Wednesday comes as more people were tested. For the past 3 days, daily virus cases hovered in the 400s, partly due to fewer tests over the weekend. New cases stem from various spots, including schools, offices, and social gatherings. A high school in northern Seoul reported 34 cases, and now tests are underway for 13 schools nearby. 14 infections were also linked to a singing room in Kimchi, Gyeongsang-namdo Province. Over the past week, South Korea has recorded a daily average of about 525 new cases. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
To prevent cluster infections happening at schools, in the pandemic, the South Korean government has been putting a cap on attendance at schools, depending on the level of social distancing. Today, the Education Ministry announced that it's raising the attendance limit under distancing level 2, and that'll affect the capital region. In addition, the plan is to have schools to have full attendance starting the second semester this year, which is in August. Our Kim Do-yeon has the details.
From June 14th, middle schools in the Seoul area will be able to have more students back in the classroom as schools' capacity limits will be increased to 2/3 from the current 1/3 under level 2 social distancing measures. This comes as the Education Ministry is eyeing the full opening of schools when the second semester begins in August.
Dear citizens, it is time for full support from all sectors related to education, including systematic expansion of face-to-face classes with the goal of full attendance so that the learning deficit caused by COVID-19 can be fully recovered.
Hardest hit by the attendance limits were middle schools in the capital region. The attendance rate for these schools is currently at under 50% as the region is under social distancing level 2. There are exemptions for elementary and high schools nationwide, allowing them to have more than 67% of their capacity. And in other regions with lower social distancing levels, middle school attendance rate was at 80%. Online classes were in place for those who didn't go to school, but the general consensus is that in-person classes are much better for students.
I like in-person classes because I can talk to my classmates. Also, I can concentrate better.
I think schools are like small communities. I can talk to my friends and teachers and learn how to cooperate with one another.
Another ease measure is that vocational high schools, which rely heavily on on-site education, will have full in-person attendance as long as the distancing measures don't rise above level 2. The minister added that by the middle of this month, the steps toward full attendance in August will be clear. In addition, a project will be launched to make up for the loss in learning caused by remote lessons, not just to fill gaps in students' knowledge, but to boost their confidence and emotional stability. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And officials say this month will be the most critical to South Korea's vaccination campaign. It's in June that they expect most senior citizens will get at least one dose of a coronavirus vaccine. If more than 80% of people over 60 do get their shots, and they're the group at the highest risk from the virus, then the country will be on track to reach its goal for the end of the month of inoculating a quarter of the whole population. Lee Kyung-eun reports.
The month of June will determine whether South Korea can achieve herd immunity among senior citizens and ultimately give 13 million people at least one COVID-19 vaccine dose by the end of the first half of 2021. The government's goal is to reach 80% participation rate among those 60 to 74 who'll be getting the AstraZeneca vaccine. As of Wednesday, South Korea's Prime Minister said the figure is nearing 75%. With a single day remaining until the booking period ends, the authorities on Tuesday called for last-minute participation. They cited the positive effects of the vaccines witnessed at 4 vaccinated nursing hospitals, which have recently experienced COVID-19 outbreaks. 2 of the facilities involved variant cases as well.
Based on analysis, the AstraZeneca vaccines in the affected facilities showed more than 90% protection against the UK variant. All 4 facilities mentioned also showed a 90% protection rate in general.
So far, more than 1.2 million people among these people over the age of 60 have received their first shots. For those over 75, inoculation started back in April. The authorities aim to finish giving them their first shots by June 13th. Vaccines arriving as planned to smoothly carry out these plans. Earlier Wednesday, a regular shipment from Pfizer containing 650,000 doses arrived in the country. The previous day, some 879,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine were distributed. Also on Tuesday, the first batch of the Moderna's vaccine arrived in South Korea from overseas. They're likely to be rolled out in mid-June upon final approval. And the Johnson & Johnson's vaccines provided by the U.S. government will likely to arrive here by the end of this week. 이경은, Arirang News.
And in other news, BTS have done it again. With their new single, Butter, they've scored another #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 chart in the U.S. They went straight to the top, and on that chart, it's their 4th #1. Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
BTS are not stopping as they keep pulling in listeners with their own superstar glow. The group's latest single, Butter, debuted at #1 on Billboard's main singles chart, garnering 32.2 million streams and selling almost 243,000 downloads in the week ending May 27th. It marks the group's 3rd #1 debut on the industry's most influential music chart, following Dynamite and Life Goes On in 2020. They've had 4 #1s if their chart-topping remix of Savage Love is included. According to Billboard, the Korean superstars' #1s in the Hot 100 chart happened all in the past 9 months, marking the act's quickest accumulation of 4 #1s since Justin Timberlake a decade and a half ago, and among groups the fastest since the Jackson 5 in 1970. An expert says BTS faced tough competition as there was a lot of hype for Olivia Rodrigo's song. Yet the superstars show that they are a pop phenomenon, especially by getting more radio airtime than before.
Their streaming and their sales numbers were similar to what happened when they released Dynamite, but with this song in particular, they were able to have even more radio support than ever. Radio is a tough area to accomplish, so for an international act to be able to do that, I think really shows that BTS has just solidified themselves as pop phenomenons.
Experts say Butter's old-school vintage sounds and the way the music highlights each member's own charms have contributed to each success.
The song has a retro aspect that all generations can enjoy along with much more gripping power.
If Dynamite was sort of an introduction to BTS to a wider audience, Butter is sort of the next step in helping them understand BTS's personalities, more of who these guys are.
With the extra punch of their individual personalities in the song, Butter is connecting BTS with more general listeners, showing their popularity hasn't reached its limit. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
As part of efforts to ensure that the world knows that kimchi is a Korean dish, pushing back against recent claims in China, the Korean government has published a 2nd volume of a booklet called Kimchi in the Eyes of the World. It contains the experiences of foreign residents in Korea and visitors at Korean cultural centers overseas. It explains in detail the difference between the Korean kimchi and the Chinese dish pao cai, which some in China have claimed to be the global standard for salted, spicy, fermented cabbage. Officials say it'll be distributed through cultural centers, foreign embassies, and the KoreaNet website. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.